higher you sit up on the bleachers, the more in you. Higher up.
Grass in the yard here. There wasn't all this gravel, dust, and bleachers. These are all here because the North American Police Equestrian Games are hosting their events here in September. So just trying to picture it without all this stuff here. There was a running track around the perimeter at one time. On the asphalt over here to my right or left over there, that was once a weight pit and also a basketball court. There's another basketball court in the back over there. There also used to be a baseball diamond field out here in the yard. So the kind of 20s, 30s, 40s, the inmates had teams in and amongst themselves, and sometimes they would even play all-star teams coming in from the outside. Always home games, of course, here, pen to pen, but they did play baseball against people from the outside. The yard was open year-round. The only times when it would be closed were in times of really low visibility. So like if there was really heavy fog, a blizzard, anything that could obstruct the view of the officers and these armed posts over here. Attached to this building, as well as there's a cage in that corner attached onto the shop dome, as well as the southeast tower over here that, as you can see, has a catwalk along the wall, so they can go out of the tower and walk along. This east wall over here was the site of, as Jerry already mentioned, Red Ryan's escape in 1923. Him and 4 other inmates made it over the wall here with a simple grappling hook and a rope. But before they did, they set the stables on, the livery stables, which are on fire over here, to act as a distraction so that they could make their way over the wall. They were all eventually caught, and as Jerry mentioned, Red Ryan did come back here to finish his sentence. Then it had been 41 years since a successful over-the-wall escape had happened, and then 1999 happened. And some of you may be familiar with Tyrone Khan's escape over the wall. Well, he went over right where there's that little dip in the wall over there, where the two walls sort of meet together. So Tyrone was an inmate here, and he actually fashioned a dummy to resemble himself. He worked at the canvas repair shop. He put it in his cell and made it look like he was in for the evening count. So kind of long story short, he stayed in the shops overnight. He left a window open during the day, crawled out of the shops, came out here in the wee hours of the morning and set up this sort of desk ladder type structure against the wall. He made it over, and on the other side even managed to sprinkle cayenne pepper on the ground so the dogs couldn't even trace his scent. So he was on the loose for a few weeks. Big manhunt on looking for him. Police actually found him 2 weeks later in Toronto, and he took his own life in a standoff with police. So that's kind of how his story. 34 escape attempts total, in different fashions, in different ways, over the 178 years, involving about 64 inmates. So a fair amount over the years. Does anybody have any questions?
Most of those attempts were they over the wall or through other means?
Through all sorts of different means, yeah. Like the one that we heard at the main gate, how Officer Kenny, like those inmates escaped through vehicle, and like there's all sorts of different stories. Too many to really talk about on the tour, but those are just a few kind of interesting ones. Alright, we'll make our way out of the yard now. Here to my left, your right, was the east shops, and then if you look to the far west down there, you kind of see a twin building beyond this middle shop area, and that was the west shop. So they were shops in industry at one time. However, they eventually both became the Regional Treatment Center. So the RTC was actually an accredited psychiatric facility that treated inmates from not only Kingston Pen, but surrounding institutions. The interesting thing about the Regional Treatment Center was, despite the fact that it was inside the walls here at KP, it actually ran as a completely separate institution. So it had its own warden, it had its own staff, and its own inmate population, if you can believe it. So an inmate from KP here could have been over at the RTC receiving psychiatric treatment. However, they were not a part of the KP account. So they had their own inmate count, they had their own recreation time, they had their own gymnasium, they even had their own Aboriginal grounds. Everything was kept separate. And great attempts were made to make sure that both populations stayed separate from one another. If you look down to the very end of this road down here, you'll see 2 double doors. That's the south entrance to the hospital, or the infirmary here at Kingston Pen. It was open kind of 24 hours a day, 24/7, and it was staffed with some nurses, some doctors, had x-ray facilities. It's kind of where inmates could go for your basic medical treatment. Inmates from Kingston Pen as well, it was regional as well, so from other institutions could go to the hospital here to receive medical treatment. The only thing the hospital didn't really have was operating rooms. So an inmate needed surgery, or if they had a very severe medical condition such their chest, or stab wounds, they slashed up or something. They would do like you and I would do. We would call an ambulance and they would be sent out to a hospital in the community. There's a very large palliative care, kind of end-of-life care to this section as well for the aging inmate population. Also in 1939, another officer, one of the 7, actually lost his life in the hospital here. His name was Officer John McCormick, and an inmate stabbed him in the hospital. So unfortunately, he lost his life there. Very unfortunate, but things did happen. Any questions? We're going to continue on this way. And I'll just point out those buildings to my left or right over here. This is the kitchen. So this is where all the inmate meals were prepared. The inmates who really liked to work in the kitchen or try to find employment there were those who liked to work out, because they believed that they could access more food, better food in the kitchen if they worked there. You could just slip a few things on the side. They also believed that soy milk of all things would help bulk them up. So they tried to smuggle in a lot of soy milk in later years. Meals were planned out on a monthly basis from headquarters from Canada. And the inmates really had no choice as to what they wanted to eat. Whatever was served on the line was what they got, with the exception, of course, of religious and dietary restrictions. If you're wondering what they ate, kind of meal-wise, they ate pretty much like you and I would: spaghetti and meatballs, burgers and fries, roast beef and potatoes, all sorts of different things. C7 over here, I'll just point out again, it did become part of the regional treatment center in the mid-2000s. And as you can see by the high chain link fences, great attempts were made to make sure that both populations stayed distinct and separate from one another. In the 1950s, the inmate population activity actually got to be over 1,000 inmates, which is way above capacity, so they actually had to convert sections of this building to be temporary dormitories for the overflow inmates. For these walls here, you would find the indoor gymnasium, just like any gym you'd see at a high school or recreational facility. Very large weight pit in here. Also the multi-denominational, multi-faith chapel could be found in here after it was moved after the 1971 riot. As well as there was a hobby and craft area in here where inmates could go and do painting, work, and all sorts of different crafts. Down yonder over here was the South Sally Port. So this is the main kind of entranceway for all incoming vehicle traffic, especially after that main gate was decommissioned for all incoming vehicles, as Donna kind of mentioned to us, as well as that kind of north gate that you can see from King Street, the white one that looks very much like the south one. It's only used for temporary access for emergency purposes only. So like if the military or the police force needed to come in very quickly, they could potentially open that one, but as a general rule of thumb, that gate is never really used. Only this one is for all the main incoming vehicles. This limestone section of the wall over here is where the west port would have been. So if you walked right through this wall here, you basically walk right down into Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. And as you and I know, over the years things changed and less things were delivered by boat and by ship through the waterways and more by the roads and through vehicle transportation. So they just decided to seal up this section of the wall in the limestone, and they no longer needed to staff this tower. This is also the general site of where Officer Kennedy was born. So if you remember at the very beginning of our tour when we were told that Officer Kennedy was born here and died here, this is the general area of where his father's staff apartments would have been. So it's kind of interesting. It looked a lot different, but generally speaking, this is where he was born. You can continue following me here along. Here. Interesting to note about the towers is they can actually be accessed from the outside and not the inside. They look like they all have doors on the inside, but they're actually all filled in with concrete. The officer who is coming to duty or coming to work has to drive, maybe to whichever tower he's working at, or walk. And the officer in there at the time will always down a key from the outside. The officer coming in, usually by rope. And then the officer on the outside at the bottom unlocks the door with that key, and they basically just switch places. Also kind of an interesting, another escape attempt story that happened along this corridor here. If you look up, you can see that actually both of these roofs of these buildings are slightly higher than the fence over here. So on one occasion, this inspired 3 inmates who tried to zip line from the roof to the wall. They created their own little makeshift zip line contraption and proceeded to try to zip line. Well, they were clearly in a rush because they thought it would be a grand idea to all go one right after the other. They failed to realize that all three of them on the zip line at once would slack it down to the point where they were dangling about 6 feet off the ground here. So, staff members quickly caught on to that and basically just came by and plucked these inmates off like clothes off a drying line. Probably got sent to the hole for that because it's definitely breaking a prison rule. In the basement of this services building is actually where a lot of the industrial inmate laundry was done. So a lot of the towels, blankets, sheets, kind of all that big stuff that was too much to handle on the range would come here to the laundry services, and inmates could also work in the laundry services as well. So we're kind of back to the initial area now, if you kind of see where we are. And folks, we are approaching the end of the tour, so if you do have kind of any remaining questions or anything that's on your mind, now is kind of your opportunity to ask before the tour is over. I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have.
How many people work in the kitchen?
Like inmates or just total?
Oh, total.
Anywhere from probably 15, 20.
To cook for 500 people?
We had like very industrial kitchen.
Not many people.
Kind of went up and down, obviously, with like various inmates and whoever was allowed to be employed there, because that was a very high risk job because there was knives and like there's things you had to be security cleared for. So sometimes there'd be less, but so folks, we're just gonna stay to this side of this tour group so we get to their left. We really highly encourage you to head across the street to the Penitentiary Museum if you haven't already been. It is by donation only. Really make this tour come to life if you've never been there before. It's an amazing museum. Really highly encourage it.